Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another tier list, and today we are ranking all the ultimate abilities in the game. By the way, we are almost at 700,000 subscribers, and we're gonna make a special video for you once you hit that, so please remember to click the subscribe button and enjoy the show. All right, so the first hero today we have Abrams. Now, Abrams' ultimate is Seismic Impact. What happens is you press once, he jumps up in the air, and then you press again. He slams down and stuns enemies in a huge circle. This is really good for stealing mid-boss crystal, and when it's maxed out, it actually makes you stun, silent, sleep, root, and disarm immune, and it lasts for 3 seconds after landing. The good thing about this is it kind of ties all of his toolkit together. It means that he can get a guaranteed shoulder charge into a melee punch. Melee punch? Every punch is melee. Afterwards, and he also gains max HP and fire rate per hero hit. So very strong, and it's one of the reasons why Abrams is definitely one of the best heroes in the game right now. There's very little counterplay because he's basically got unstoppable once the ult is maxed out. The cooldown on it though is absolutely massive, 160 seconds. So we are gonna put it at the very top of A tier because of that. Also, if you're looking up at an Abrams ulting, you can sidestep and dodge it. So that's where the kind of counterplay comes in. But for stuff like stealing the crystal, this is probably one of the best ultimates in the game. Next up, we have Bebop. Bebop's ultimate is a hyper beam. It's received a lot of changes in the last few patches. At the end of the beam, there's now an AoE, as you can see here. He still has a pretty slow turn rate, but he does the same damage even if I'm not aiming straight at the target. This makes it very good for builds that have Majestic Leap, because if people are hiding behind cover, then you can still hit them with Majestic Leap. So let me just show you here. So this is the typical ult build now. You Majestic Leap up, and you can notice how, because it's got a slow turn speed, it's a lot easier when you're up in the air and further away. Another cool thing about this ult is that once it's maxed out, it gives you 100% lifesteal against enemy heroes. And because it also does an AoE on the ground around you, it can also kill people pretty easily if they try to push you in like small corridors and stuff. And it has a surprisingly low cooldown once it's upgraded. It's a minute less than Abrams. It's only 100 seconds. So where do we put it? I think not only is Bebop's ult really good, it's also really good at farming. It has a lot of use. As soon as it hits 7 minutes, as long as you have like 20, 30 spirit power, you can easily farm tier 3 camps to easily get a lot of souls. So I actually think that this is one of the best ultimates in the game, and we're gonna put it in S tier. All right, next up we have Dynamo. Dynamo's ult is called Singularity. It basically pulls all enemies nearby into the center in a circle, like this. There is zero counterplay if you're hit by it, and it targets everybody in a circle. And when you upgrade it, it gets a bigger radius, bigger channeling time, and also deals a percentage-based damage once it's maxed out. This is by far the most oppressive and impactful ult in the entire game, and it's the reason why this hero is very sought after, especially in higher elo. He's not necessarily a solo carry type of hero, but in the right hands with the right team comp, he can do crazy things with like Haze ult combo, for instance, and so on. A lot of people buy Majestic Leap and Refresher on it, because the downside is also that this is one of the longest cooldown ults in the game with 191 seconds. But nonetheless, because this is one of those, this is the absolute best ult to also steal the mid-boss crystal, it's kind of just a given that Dynamo is right at the top of S tier. Next up, we have Grey Talon. Grey Talon is definitely not the strongest hero in the game right now. They made his ult is basically an owl that you send around and you can control it. It has a very low cooldown once you upgrade it. And it also at max, it also executes enemies that are below 22% health. This is a great tool to help teamfights in other lanes, because when you ult, you can send this bird, you can accelerate it with mouse 1 as well, and you can fly around like this. And and it stuns them for a short duration. So that means it also interrupts channeled ultimates like Dynamo and Bebop. And it gives you 5 spirit power permanently if you get a killing blow with it, which is pretty big. This is definitely a very strong ultimate considering how low of a cooldown it is and stuff too. The biggest downside with this ultimate is that you are completely exposed. So while you are doing all of this, your hero is completely unable to perform any action. So you see how he's extremely exposed now, meaning that when you're ulting, you usually need to be far away from the team fight to be sure that you don't get jumped. And that is also why Grey Talon is one of the weakest heroes in the game right now. So I think Grey Talon, to me, comes... I'm probably going to say B tier, actually. I just don't think that the ult will be as impactful as you want it to be, even though it has a nice execute and everything. It has a low cooldown, but because you're so exposed when you're using it, and I don't know, I just think there are a lot more ults that are easier to use that will get the job done. I think the Grey Talon's ult is mostly impactful in the laning stage when you're seeing that a fight breaks out in the other lane and you send an owl over. But I feel like it falls off pretty heavily late game because it means that you won't be in the fight in the first place. All right, then we have Haze. Haze has an ult called Bullet Dance. So Bullet Dance increases your fire rate. It makes you spin around on the ground. And it damages all heroes nearby. They recently added a more determined circle, so it's easier to see the exact max range of the ult. It's got quite a long cooldown, but there is cooldown reduction talent, and this is an ult that scales really well late game because it applies on hit effects with bullets. They recently fixed a bug where it didn't apply Tesla bullets and Lucky Shot. Now it does. Very common to go Ricochet on this hero, Silencer plus Unstoppable. You press both Silencer and Unstoppable and you just jump and you press 4 and you spin, and there's pretty much the only thing you can do to stop it is basically metal skin. That is the only downside. Another cool thing about Haze is that duration of Bullet Dance scales with Spirit. You can see there's a purple star there on the duration timer, and the same goes for her ammo size. And Bullet Dance does not use ammo either, and it also gives you evasion chance. So this is by far one of the most oppressive ults a late game, because this is why Haze is a hyperscaling carry. When you get to that point where you do tons of damage, you can basically, in a huge AoE, silence everybody and damage them. So this is by far one of the best ults in the game, and the reason why Haze is one of the top carries in the game too. Next up we have Infernus. Infernus's ult does a stun in an AoE around you after a short delay. So what you normally do, so I'll show you here. So when you press this, see there's a circle around you, and then eventually you explode. Because he's got Flame Dash, the combination is usually to ult and then sprint in so that you get some gap closing. And when it's upgraded, it gets a bigger duration, it does more damage, and also gives you 100% lifesteal. It also scales with Spirit, by the way. A few things I want to mention is that I feel like the lifesteal is something you very rarely get to use, because normally you use his ult to initiate. I've seen sometimes where it can like save you out of like a pickle, but in a lot of times you use your ult to kind of sprint in, meaning that you're normally full HP when you're initiating. So I don't feel like the 100% lifesteal does that much. The other problem with this is that I feel like this is one of those ults that are very telegraphed. It makes like a loud fire sound and you see him sprinting in. And because there are so many heroes with mobility and so many items that give you mobility too, like Warp Stone or Superior Stamina, Fleet Foot to give movement speed, I just feel like a lot of the time against good players, Infernus's ult doesn't really do much unless it's like a follow-up with like a Dynamo ult, or if someone's like stunned or something first. I feel this is by far the weakest part of his toolkit. I think all these 3 abilities synergize well together, but I feel like there's been a lot of games, and I played quite a lot of Infernus, been a lot of games where I almost don't feel like his ult is doing anything than getting me killed, because it forces you to kind of go all in. Because one thing I've noticed is that when you pop Infernus ult, you just charge in. But when you don't have your ult, you kind of stay in the back and you apply some dots here and there and you try to play more around positioning and stuff. And that's what I've kind of noticed, that sometimes the ult kind of baits you into going in. So yeah, definitely helps to buy a Warp Stone, for instance, to try to place this. But I actually think this is one of the weaker ultimates in the game. I'm gonna put it in C tier. I still think that Great Talon's ult is better and has more impact. And I just think that a lot of the time, Infernus ult doesn't do much. Next up, we have Ivy. So Ivy's ult is a controversial one. It's been changed around a lot and there's a lot of text here, a lot to dive into. But essentially the overall thing is that either you just take flight or you can pick up an ally. And when you drop your ally or the bomb, because if you're not carrying an ally, you carry a bomb, you create a big explosion that also silences people when your ult is maxed. So I'll show you what this looks like. There's a short casting time. See, now I'm doing self-cast. You fly around, you see there's a lot of different stuff on the screen. You can speed up, move down and stuff. And you see the AoE, that's where the bomb drops. It's a huge AoE. See that? And it also silences in that entire radius. Another thing, as you can see here, there's also a bunch of stats that you get. So your ally gains bullet resist but cannot attack and deals 50% less damage. This is because there used to be a combo where you could like use 7 ult or Haze ult and Ivy picks you up and you fly around and do a lot of damage. You can still do that, but now it has a 50% damage penalty. But yeah, when you drop an ally, Ivy and ally gains a bullet shield when flying ends. So this is like a pretty strong ultimate, and it's the only ultimate that can still just fly the urn across the map. So the thing about Ivy ult now is that not only can you fly an ally that holds the urn, but because they made the casting time slightly longer, it's now 1.3 when you self-cast it, it actually means that you stay still for long enough to pick up the urn. So you can actually run onto the urn, self-cast ult, and you'll pick up the urn and fly away with it. So that is still one of the most broken mechanics. You could do it with Mirage for a short while, but that already got nerfed. So one of the really strong builds right now, one of the top builds in the game after they buffed spirit builds a little bit, is the Ivy build with spirit. So you have escalating exposure and stuff, and because she has an ult where she has so much mobility, she basically flies around and she drops a Kutsu bomb plus a silence bomb in the middle of team fights. And she gets a refresher and she can do it again. She gets escalating exposure. It's extremely oppressive, and it kind of just came out as a result of gun builds getting nerfed and people figuring out new ways to play the hero. So where does that put Ivy? In my opinion, Ivy goes right up here. It doesn't have an extremely long cooldown. It's, let me see, how long is it? 85 seconds. You can transfer the urn. You can drop a bomb that silences. You can save teammates. You can split push. It's just an extremely versatile ultimate that will like help you out of so many situations. Next up, we have Kelvin. Kelvin has the UFC dome. The big frozen shelter, you pop it, you get a big frozen shelter around you, it lowers people's fire rates, and it heals everybody on your team inside it. And when you max it, it also scales with spirit power. So now it can heal a lot when you're late game and you get healing buffs and stuff as well. This is an extremely good ultimate. They recently changed it because one issue there was with Kelvin before was that he was like an instant pick in tournaments, because the frozen shelter would just instantly win you an objective. So they changed it to where when he uses his frozen shelter, I wonder if I can show you guys here. So fast, see? It now freezes the objective. So this was a change they made because it ended up being kind of boring to watch and to play, where as long as Kelvin had ult, you couldn't do any objective because he would just freezing dome, so you can't steal the mid-boss crystal, or he would just freezing dome the urn delivery, or the walker, or even the patron. So they made it this pretty clever fix where it just freezes whatever objective is inside the frozen shelter. So that changes the way you use it, but it becomes much more situational and much more like you can use it to save a walker, you know, or you can use it to stop a tower from shooting when you're diving. So there's a lot of cool scenarios where you use it, but it becomes a little bit more skill expression than just like popping a bubble to like win. Okay, so where does this put Kelvin? I think this puts Kelvin's ult in the top of A. I still think that the ult was better before. It changed a lot on how you play him for sure, but it's still a really good ult. But now it's kind of like, because some heroes are really good at like hand-to-hand combat, so it becomes a more supportive tool in a lot of cases. unless you have like extreme amounts of damage. Because like, let's say you're fighting against an Abrams or a Shiv, right? Even if you dome them, it doesn't mean you're just gonna win the fight automatically, but it does help a lot. All right, then we have Lady Geist. Lady Geist is probably one of the most unfun ultimates to play against because it switches health levels within enemy targets. For those of you who play Dota, this is exactly the same ult that Terrorblade has. So the way it works is that, let's say I'm half health now and I swap health with this guy. Now we switch health. The downside of this ult is that it's got a 7-meter range. It's very short. And when it's upgraded, has a better like minimum health ratio, plus it also gives you fire rate and spirit resistance. This is why a lot of Geist players, they will be like hiding in a veil like this with like 2 HP, and then when like an innocent bypasser runs by, you just press 4, and then because his life drain also silences, there is like almost no counterplay if it's done perfectly. Yeah, so this is definitely one of those where Warpstone is pretty much mandatory because of the short range, and that is also the biggest downside of this ult. It is very good in a 1 versus 1. It kind of falls off late game because you don't like all of like Lady Geist's Essence Bomb and Malice is really good when you play it from medium to long range. So it sometimes does feel like the ult it's kind of like Infernus, where it kind of forces you to go in a little bit harder than you necessarily want to. So in a lot of cases, I think that Lady Geist will also just use it as an oh shit button if someone like chases you down, because you kind of want to try to force a 1v1 to do it. With that being said, I definitely think that Geist's ult is good, but it's not as good as some of the other. I don't think it has that big of an impact in the game super late. I think it belongs here. It's very annoying in the laning stage, especially in like a solo lane and stuff, but late game, sometimes it forces you to get into really awkward positions, and it also doesn't work on shield builds. It only swaps actual health. So if there's tons of shield on a target, it only swaps their health, but they keep their shields. And that is also why I've seen some Lady Geists by Diviner's Kevlar. So they go in and then they shield up. Next up, we have Mr. Jacob Lash. So Lash ult is called a Death Slam. You basically pick up a hero, and once that circle fills up, you can choose to put that hero somewhere else. Normally this is comboed by using grapple first, so you jump up above them and you do this, and then it can displace them somewhere else. The interesting thing about this ult is that his throw distance scales with spirits.
I'll throw him around.
So when you get late game, let's say you for instance have boundless spirits and you ult, you can now toss people much further. And this is one of the most impactful ult to defend your patron, because you can come out of spawn and you can toss them into your own spawn, which is very strong. It's also one of the few ults that can displace people, multiple players at the same time, and it also deals a fair share of damage. And it also slows them in the landing zone, and it has a pretty low cooldown, only 82 seconds. The hard part about using Death Slam is that it forces you to pretty much be right above them. The actual grab range is pretty small. You can increase it with buying reach, and you're also extremely susceptible to being crowd controlled while you're floating right above them. So you can get hooked out of the air with Bebop, you can get Paradox ulted. There's a lot of situations where you would have to buy Unstoppable to get your ult off. So that's kind of the downside. It's a very high skill ceiling ult, which also just applies to this hero in general. But I think that's the biggest downside to Lash. In a lot of cases, you don't necessarily get the value you want out of it. And if you're slightly behind, it feels like your Death Slam just does pretty much nothing. With that being said, I still think it's one of the best ults in the game. Not quite up there with these ones in my opinion, because it's harder to pull off and you're like pretty exposed. I guess that goes for Haze too, but Haze buys Unstoppable almost every single game. So yeah, it's also great for mid-boss deals because you can actually, if you are at the top, you can actually pull people out of the mid-boss pit and throw them away. All right, next up we have McGinnis. McGinnis' ult is called Heavy Barrage. It is a channeled ability. You can move around as you're slightly slower. It has a pretty low cooldown, only 1 minute. You pop it, and then you basically just have a small circle like this, and you can just walk around and do this. It slows the target. It's good at tower pushing. It deals a fair share of damage, but you are super exposed because you're moving so slowly. And they recently also fixed a bug where you could look straight up.
Let's see him dodge this.
You used to be able to look straight up, and then it would just hit right under you because it has a minimum range. And they fixed that. So that's another issue with this. If you compare this to Bebop ult, notice how if you get pushed with Heavy Barrage, you literally don't have counterplay. Whereas if you have Bebop's channeled ability, he has a big circle under him. So that's why that ult is definitely more favored. The biggest advantage of this ult is how low the cooldown is. But I do think that in a lot of cases, you don't get that much value out of Heavy Barrage. It's pretty much only used if you play Spirit build. I think when you play gun McGinnis, you probably never use your ult. If you play Spirit, you can use it to push, obviously, to clear waves. I think some people also just use it to farm tier 3 camps early. So in that regards, it's pretty similar to Bebop. But I do believe this is a lot weaker. So down here with Great Talon and Lady Geist. Next up, we have Mo and Krill. Mo and Krill's got an ult called Combo. It holds the target in place, stuns them, deals damage during the channel. If they die during combo, you permanently gain max health. This ult is very strong. When it's maxed out, it increases the DPS and does 100% lifesteal as well. And because Mo and Krill is very tanky, this almost guarantees that you can't really burst him down while it's ulting. So I'll show you how the ult works. You're basically just like hitting the target multiple times while they're stun locked, and you can even increase it with duration extender. You can get torment pulse to do more damage while you're doing it. And it's probably one of the most hated ults in the game because when you get Mo and Krill ulted, life just feels unfair. And to an extent, that's obviously Dynamo ult too, but the difference is the Dynamo ult has like a 3 times longer cooldown than combo. And I think this is one of the strongest ults in the game, and it's great at singling out players that are ahead in farm. So whenever you're playing against someone who's got a lot of farm, then this is just such a great tool to kind of shut them down in team fights. And the fact that you also get permanent 30 health every time a hero dies from it, it makes it even better. And they also added a 3-second grace period, just like the Great Talon ult, where even if they die up to 3 seconds after you combo them, you still get the bonus health. And this is because there was a lot of situations where people just try to use the ult to kill steal instead of using it in the most ideal scenario. So yeah, extremely strong hero and extremely strong ult. And it goes all the way up here. I still think that Haze and Dynamo ult is slightly stronger just because they can wipe a full team in an ideal world. But Mo and Krill ult is disgusting. I'm sorry, but another thing with Mo and Krill too, it's kind of counters flyers too, like Vindicta and Great Talon, because you can actually get Phantom Strike and ult them and they actually fall to the ground. So yeah, next up we have Paradox. It's an ult that's been discussed a lot. So it has a very low cooldown. It fires a projectile that swaps their position with the target enemy hero, and you gain Spirit Lifesteal, and the enemy takes damage over time. When you max it, it increases the damage and lowers the cooldown. So when it's maxed out now, it has a 34-second cooldown. So I'll show you how it works. You send out a projectile, and when it hits the target, you swap spots. And this projectile is pretty fast. It's pretty similar to play on how you play Bebop. Going for a hook, it's pretty similar projectile speed as well. But there's one essential difference, and that is that when targets are far away with Bebop, it's really hard to hit the hook unless someone stuns them first. But Paradox has an ability called Kinetic Carbine. And what this ability does, it stuns them for a brief second, allowing you to almost guarantee a paradoxical swap hit. So if I pop my carbine now and I hit this guy, you see how it gets slowed for just a brief second, which gives you just enough time to swap them. Now, obviously, there's one big change here, and that is the fact that you are switching positions. You're not just hooking. And that is why every Paradox player buys Warpstone as one of their first tier 3 items. It's just basically a core item on any Paradox build, pretty much. But yeah, This is a very strong ability with a very short cooldown, and it becomes really hard to play against if you're playing against both Paradox and Bebop, for instance, because there's constantly these kind of like mini projectiles that can hit you when you're trying to peek somewhere and switches you out. Paradox doesn't have the highest win rate, and I think the part of that is because first of all, it swaps you into a position that isn't good. So if not used correctly, you will get punished for it. And I think it's like, compared to like using Bebop, this is definitely like harder in general because you need to like combo it with your own ability, and it requires you to aim to hit the kinetic carbine. And I think it's one of those things where this is a very strong ult. Like the higher skill level the lobbies go, it becomes more and more essential. And because it kind of ties her toolkit together where you can place down a time wall, and time wall silences when it's maxed. So you can time wall and swap people through it, and they take extra damage and get silenced. So it's a pretty brutal combo in a 1v1, a lot of outplay potential, but not like as straightforward to use as some other abilities. And I think that's like the biggest downside to me. But nonetheless, I still think that I'm putting Paradox up here. Okay, and then we have Pocket. Pocket's ultimate, you guys. Pocket's ultimate is called Affliction. It applies a damage over time to all nearby enemies in a circle around you. When you upgrade it, it does more damage. Also adds a 60% healing reduction to every target. And it lasts for 18 seconds. This is one of those ultimates that almost guarantees that you have to run back to spawn or run away from a team fight, because it's just constantly gonna tick you down. If you go spirit items too, you can see that the scaling is 0.4 damage per spirit. So let's say you buy Boundless Spirit, now it's ticking for 80 instead of 50 DPS. And because it lasts for 18 seconds, that means that completely without any spirit items, this ability does almost 1,000 damage. It does 900 damage over 18 seconds to any target, as long as it's maxed out. It's very, very, very good. And Pocket is very, very, very good too. Another thing to say about it is that there's not that many anti-heal functions in the game. There is Heal Bane, and there is Decay, and there is Toxic Bullets. So considering there are only 3 anti-heal items in the game and very few anti-heal abilities, this becomes very essential, especially when you're playing like a tank-heavy meta against like Abrams and Shiv. They did a small nerf to the ult today, but that was just because like, so the thing about the ult is that it doesn't kill them, it's non-lethal, but people found out that if they added a Mystic Reverb to it, it basically adds a small damage, 40% damage of a tick, which would be enough to kill them if they're at 1 health. And they've fixed that now because that was kind of broken, because you could pocket ult 3 people, and as they run back to spawn, they will eventually just die of the Mystic Reverb proc. So yeah, I think this is definitely one of the best ultimates in the game. Like I said, whenever you get hit by pocket ult, you pretty much have to just run back to base. And if you guys notice one thing now, if you watched my previous tier list, you'll notice that the S tier ultimate abilities list looks pretty similar to the S tier hero power rankings. And that is not by chance. There's a very high connection between how good a hero's ultimate is and how strong that hero is in general. Because sometimes, depending on how you play, sometimes teams can space out the team fights just enough to always have their ult in a team fight. So for instance, if you have a Haze and a Dynamo, why would you ever team fight when those ults are on cooldown? So you can play around by split pushing and doing objectives and try to dodge fights until you have your ults. And in that case, if the longer you wait between each team fight, the more it favors heroes that have more powerful ults with longer cooldowns. There is one downside to Pocket ult, and that is debuff remover. You can buy debuff remover to counter his ult. I'll find it here. But it's 4,250 souls to counter one ult on the enemy team, and he can apply it to multiple targets. So that means also that is 4,000 souls that you could have spent on improved spirit armor or bullet armor. So yeah, it's very good. Okay, next up we have 7. 7 ult is another one that has been like changed back and forth a little bit, because when this game came out, everybody thought that 7 was completely busted. Because 7's ult is essentially made for noob stomping because it just damages everybody in a huge radius. So you come off the zip line and you pop your ult like this, and you see how the circle just becomes bigger and bigger until it stops. It deals massive spirit damage and a huge AoE around you. However, first of all, you're extremely exposed. There's a talent that gives you bullet resist, channel time, radius. It just buffs up the ult in general. And the ult build's very, very popular on 7 for a while, but they did lower the damage on it quite a bit, and 7 is extremely exposed when he does it. So the first time they nerfed this, then people started building more 7 builds focused on his 3 ability, which is like Power Surge. It's like Power Spear weapon with like a Tesla bullets effect. And interestingly, 7's win rate went up after they nerfed the ult a bit, because people realized that carry 7 is so much better. It's just that it was so easy to just buy Majestic Leap, a bunch of Spirit Armor, Bullet Armor, and Mystic Slow, and just like stand in the air and channel Stormcloud. It's also countered by stuff like Knockdown. Whenever someone buys Knockdown, which is a 3000 Spirit item, you are forced to buy Unstoppable. Bebop can hook you. It doesn't cancel it, but he can hook you into a more unfavorable place. So for instance, whenever there's a 7 ulting and I play a lot of Bebop, what I usually do is either I hook him down and I double bomb him, or I just channel my ult on him because my ult has 100% lifesteal. I will always out damage a 7, and which forces him to cancel it. So this used to be pretty good, but as people got better at the game and a lot of patches came by, now this ult is just not very good. It's been a very long time since I've seen a 7 ult have huge impact, because people have learned to hide. And there are a lot of items you can buy to counter it. You can buy Curse as well if you want to. There are a lot of hero counters too, and yeah. The one time his ult has the most impact is if you ult right above the patron as you're about to lose or about to win. Because that's when it like, there's like very few spots to hide from, and it kind of gives you a huge advantage. But then the big question is, are you gonna itemize the entire game around a specific fight in the base? No, you're not. And that is why nowadays people mostly play the stun build or the gun build. So to me, 7 goes down here at the bottom of B tier. I do not think it's very, very strong anymore. Next up, we have Shiv. Shiv's ult is pretty cool. So Shiv's ult is an execute. It's similar to Axe from Dota for those of you who play him. The thing about his ult is that it's also a passive that focuses on the entire concept with his rage. So you see he has a rage bar, he builds up rage. It's technically part of his ultimate, but we're just gonna focus on the actual active effect here, because the rage part is like a huge passive. So the way his ult works is that when enemies go below a certain threshold, you can execute them. I'll spawn in an enemy here to show you what I mean. So I start shooting Infernus, and you'll notice that when he goes low enough, he's gonna turn red. See, now he's red. Also a big arrow pointing at the red target. So it's trying to really tell you that he's within execute range. And once he's within execute range, you press 4, you lunge forward, and you execute him. When this one is maxed out, it actually resets the cooldown if you finish an enemy with a killing blow. And that is very strong in long team fights. And this is why a lot of people buy Healbane on Shiv. So there's some really good synergies going on here. So this is my melee Shiv build, by the way, if you guys want to try it. The cool thing about Healbane is that it also heals whenever you kill a hero. So the reason why this is such a good synergy is because Shiv takes delayed damage with bloodletting. So when he's fighting over time, he starts taking damage over time. So that means that after he's done fighting someone and killing someone, he can technically still die from the damage he deferred, damage that is being turned into damage over time. So because you have Healbane together with his ult, it means that whenever you execute someone, it also heals you for 350, meaning that it might also just save you from that deferred damage. And if you think about this in a team fight scenario, if you get, for instance, 2 executes off, you also get 2 350 health heals off. So there's been a lot of 1v2s, 1v3s I've played as melee Shiv where they push me, and because I get to execute one of them, that heals me enough to keep going and keep going. So that adds a lot of sustain to this hero. So that is why I think Healbane is very strong on him in general. It just naturally makes him more tanky and more able to play 1 versus 2s, 1 versus 3s. It has a 95-second cooldown, and if they don't go below the execute threshold, it's essentially just a gap closer. So I think the downside of this ult is that you don't really want to use it as a gap closer. You just want to use it as a finisher. So the hardest part about Shiv's ult is that it technically has not a lot of value if you're playing from behind or if you're struggling to kill enemies in the first place. Shiv is one of those heroes that feels completely useless if you're 5-10k souls behind, but feels completely unkillable if you're 5 to 10k souls ahead. So that is like my biggest criticism to his ult, but I still think that it has a lot more usability than some of these other heroes in this tier, and especially because it resets on a killing blow. It means that you can sometimes use it again and again and again. That's when he really shines. I still think that these ults are better because you can kind of just use them whenever in a fight, while his ult is a little bit more conditional. And yeah, early game for his ult in 1v1s and stuff, you can totally just use it as a gap closer because it's sometimes hard to get in range to slice and dice. So if they're full HP, you can totally do this and then this and see you've already gotten them to half. So there's definitely worlds where you just use Killing Blow as a gap closer earlier in the game, but as the game goes on later, you kind of want to try to save it for the execute. Okay, next up we have Vindicta. Vindicta has the only ultimate in the game that increases the amount of souls you gain. So you see how it says 250 bonus souls per assassination, and if it's maxed out, it's 850 souls bonus per killing blow. You heard me, 850, and that's a lot because you don't get that many souls for kills in this game, especially early on. So the way this ult works, it's kind of the same as Shiv, where it's like an execute. It does a lot of bonus damage when they're under 50% health, and they also start glowing red. You see if I start shooting this guy a few times now, see now he glows red, indicating that he's below the threshold to get killed.
That won't be the last.
They recently did a change to her ult, 2 changes. One of them was that she now deals bonus headshot damage.
I'll have their head.
See, 20% extra bonus headshot damage, and the bonus souls are now shared with assists. So the reason why this is very important is that if you are playing in a big team fight and your Vindicta gets the last hit on like 2 to 3 heroes while you guys are fighting, that is a 2,000 to 3,000 souls advantage gained from that team fight just because Vindicta got the last hits. So if you see how much souls can swing in this game, that is massive. Before, she would get all the souls herself, and I think that's a lot worse because it kind of just makes one player in her team hyper farmed, and if she gets shot down, then like you haven't really gotten any positive gain out of it. But the fact that she can last hit and get her team so many extra souls is huge. And if you buy Rapid Recharge, she has 4 casts of this ability, and with improved burst and stuff, you can actually do quite a lot of damage without any cooldown items. It recharges every 24 seconds, and that is only with Rapid Recharge. So yeah, extremely strong ultimate, extremely hard to deal with when you're laning. So as soon as Vindicta hits 3,000 souls and gets her ult, she has one of the strongest power spikes on like that early stage, because there are so few heroes that can do a lot of damage from far away. There is like Mirage with his passive and stuff, but in the laning stage, you are no longer able to like hide behind your tower when you're low. You're no longer able to just like, because like when you get harassed a lot in the lane and you still want to last hit, it's very common to just go far back and just focus on shooting the orbs. You're no longer safe. She can snipe you from anywhere because she can also fly. So yeah, I think that this is one of the strongest ult in the game. I'm going to put her probably right up here. The reason for that is that there is no counters. There's nothing you can do to counter Vindicta ult other than getting a spirit damage. And as the game goes by, every time she gets a kill with her ult, She just helps her team get a bigger soul net worth. And I think that's like so unique and so important to emphasize how good it actually is to have an ability that grants your team 850 souls every time you get a killing blow. That is insane. Next up, we have Viscous. Viscous has a goo ball as his ult. For those of you who played Dota 2, that is a Pangolier, or for those of you who play Overwatch, it's similar to how Hammond plays. He turns into a goo ball, he rolls around, he now has tons of spirit and bullet resist, 70 and 60%. And whenever he runs over someone, he stuns them. And he also changes direction when he bounces into a wall. The biggest issue with this is that, like, unless you are really good at using this, it's surprisingly easy to try to avoid him because it's hard to control. So it's kind of like, it's definitely one of the hardest ults to use in the game. It's not like some of the other ults where you just like press a button and you have instant value. You have to like constantly like make pretty advanced mechanical plays by like punching yourself up in the air with this thing, or using Phantom Strike, Warp Stone. You can even use Ethereal Shift to stand still above someone and stun them repeatedly. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do because when it's maxed out, you can cast abilities and use items while rolling. But I do think that this is probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest ultimate to use in the game. And unless the Viscous is really good, it is not that hard to just double jump above it. It has a lot of impact, and it's the reason why like Viscous is a very typical hero to be like a one-trick player. I don't think you just play Viscous casually because there's so much to learn and so many tricks that you kind of just gotta dive into it. So I'm gonna put Viscous right next to Shiv, I think. I just still think that the ult is like not an instant value thing like Kelvin, Lash, Abrams. It requires like the right scenario, the right spacing, a lot of movement stuff. If you're really good at Viscous, you can get tons of value out of it. You might even have to buy specific items around it to really give him that mobility he needs, but it's hard to do. Next up, we have Warden. Warden's ult is called Last Stand. After charging for 2.2 seconds, release pulses that damage enemies and heal you based on the damage done. While channeling Last Stand, you have a greatly increased bullet resist. You can upgrade it to gain more radius, DPS, and cooldown. So it looks like this.
It's time to change the world.
And then you move around like this and you lifesteal a lot and you damage people nearby. I can't stress this enough how 2.2 second channeling while standing still is atrocious. It is so bad. And to make it even worse, there's a voice line. There's a voice line when he pops Last Stand saying, "Guys, get out of here. I'm about to ult you." And I'm pretty sure this is why the most common Warden builds have a lot of movement speed items. It's because every time you pop your ult, people just run to the opposite side of the server, and then you have 6 seconds to catch up with them. I'm sorry, but I think this ult is so bad. He literally goes, "It's time to change the world," and he doesn't change anything. They made a small change to his ult where he gets bullet resistance while he channels it. But this is just, I swear you get more kills by just not using this ultimate. This is the worst ultimate in the game. I have a few suggestions to make it better. Either lower the cast time of like him standing still when popping it, or have no cast time and make it like increase in power, or remove or reduce the radius of the sound cue it gives away. Because right now, you just hear a Warden around the corner going, "Oh, I'm gonna change the world." And you just go, "Okay, well, change the world on your own. I'm out of here." Yeah, this ult is just bad. Bad, bad, bad. Down to the D tier we go. This is the worst ultimate in the game. Then we have Wraith. Wraith ult
Friends are just acquaintances.
is a pretty short cooldown. Telekinesis lifts an enemy hero into the air, stunning them for a short time. When the lift ends, the target receives telekinesis damage.
Perfect.
This ult is one of the few ults that also interrupts people. So you can cancel Dynamo ult, you can cancel a Bebop ult, you can cancel 7 ult. It looks like this.
You're mine.
And it lifts them up. The biggest downside with this ult is that you can actually run away from it if you're fast or if you have movement abilities. because it sends a projectile first. So if I'm standing here,
And up they go.
see that projectile that follows you, you can actually run away from it. When it's maxed out, it actually targets enemies in an area around Wraith. So for instance, if it's a really good ult for stealing mid-boss, because you see how both of these ones now have a red diamond on them,
Lifting.
and it now stuns both of them. The reason why this ult is particularly good on Wraith is because she has the card ability and she can toss multiple cards in quick succession while they're lifted. So if you buy items like, for instance, rapid recharge, you can lift
I got him.
and it guarantees that you hit multiple cards as well. So yeah, it's a good ult. It's got a short cooldown. This is one of the reasons why Wraith is one of the best solo laners. Like in a 1v1, Wraith is great. She has a huge power spike when she gets 3k souls and gets her ult. And you're almost mandatory to buy a reactive barrier so that she can't one-shot you when you're ulted. And it's an ult that works throughout the game. And recently, there's a build that's been pretty common where, so they recently changed Shadow Weave to be a weapon item. So there is now a pretty common build where you buy Curse and Shadow Weave. So what you do is you use Shadow Weave to stealth in, and then you curse someone and ult. And the reason why you do this is to guarantee that they have no way of dodging your ult. So this is a pretty toxic combo actually, but nonetheless very strong for like being an assassin. So yeah, this ult is pretty easy to use. Like I said, the biggest downside is if people try to run away from you. So just have that in mind, not to being too far away. But I think it's pretty point and click. So I'm gonna put Wraith right up here. I think this is one of the really strong ults in the game. And I know what you guys are saying right now, looking at how there's tons of heroes in similar tier lists, but this is actually just like, the game is starting to be pretty well optimized. And I've been saying that when I've been making the other tier lists in the past too. There's not a huge gap between each tier anymore. There are some statistical outliers, of course, in every single patch, but compared to a lot of other games I've played, especially in early development, the game is actually pretty well balanced because they've managed to like, if an ability is really good, then they give it a longer cooldown, and then somehow they manage to balance that out. Okay, next up we have Yamato's ult. So, Yamato has a very unique ultimate, Shadow Transformation. Become infused with Yamato's Shadow Soul. After an invincible transformation, your abilities are refreshed and are 60% faster, and you gain damage resist and immunity to negative status effects. So, when this ult is maxed, you are immune to stuns and slows and death for 6.5 seconds. And this is one of those heroes that always buys Refresher later on if you play Spirit Yamato, because you pop Refresher and you do it again, and you now have 13 seconds of stun resist and invincibility. So this is one of those heroes that just scale really well into late game, because when you get into late game, people have so much burst damage and so much crowd control disables, like you have curse and all these items, that once you get into that part of the game, Yamato just feels so strong. She just keeps scaling because of this double ult. She is also one of the best heroes to steal the mid-boss crystal with, because you pop your ult and now you can parry the crystal and you won't get stunned if you get parried. And that is also why that melee builds are really good on Yamato, because once you pop your ult, you will not get stunned if someone parries you. So you can just chase around and just keep punching without being scared. But of course there's a counter to this. If there's a Yamato on the enemy team, you almost have to buy Silence or Curse. You almost always want to buy Silence or Curse against Yamato, because Silence stops her from casting her ult, and Curse stops her from Refresher as well. Because Silence, you can still use items, but if you're cursed, you cannot use items or abilities. So that is the ultimate way to deal with Yamato. I'll show you guys what the ult looks like. So first you transform, and now you run around, you shoot faster, your abilities charge faster, and you're unkillable. It's pretty damn strong. In terms of where to put her, I actually think that you put her all the way up here. I just think that this is such an impactful ult, And this is like one of those heroes where the entire playstyle of the hero revolves around the ults. You don't go into team fights without having Yamato ult. You never do. You just farm until you have it. And when you get refresher, you probably do not fight unless you have a refresher. It just ties her entire toolkit together. And you can use her ult to disjoint stuff too. Like if you put 2 Bebop bombs on a Yamato, she pops Shadow Transformation. Now it dispels both of those bombs because you're invincible while you transform. And then last but not least, we have Mirage. Mirage is the newest hero added to the game. He has an ult called Traveler, and you can target an ally or visible enemy hero on the minimap and teleport to where they were when your channel started. After teleporting, you gain movement speed as well as fire rate until your next reload. This is the ganker ult. It is very strong early game because let's say that you're playing in a duo lane and your teammate is in a solo lane. You can tell him to engage the enemy and then you can just join them in after a 2.5 second channel. You're in the lane and you're helping him fight. And because you have a tornado to follow up as well, you also have some disables. When you level it up, it gets a lower cooldown, more movement speed and fire rate. I'll show you what it looks like. You press 4, it shows the minimap. And then you can teleport to enemy or teammates and you can see the casting animation there and you land at this spot and now you have bonus, fire rate and movement speed. This is basically the only global ult in the game right now. Technically Great Talon's ult is also global and IV kinda, but this is like the only real global ult in the game. If people are good at communication and map awareness, this can be extremely strong. For those of you who've played MOBAs like Dota and stuff, Dawnbreaker and Nature's Prophet and Spectre, you know how strong global ults can be. Not just because of the ability to like go into a fight quickly, but also because it means that you don't have to be near your team before the fight breaks out. So what that means is because there are 4 lanes, right? It means that if your team groups up on one side of the map, you can now split push the other side of the map as much as possible. And what often happens is that let's say you push a walker, then they have to send someone to defend the walker. So now there's one less player from the enemy team on the other side. So if a fight breaks out on the other side, now you can teleport into that fight, essentially forcing a 5 versus 6 for the enemies. So that is a huge advantage. As the game goes on, I feel like this doesn't become that strong when you're in a fight, the ult doesn't do anything, and that's kind of the downside of it. It's kind of used as like a map control and initiation tool, which also means that when you're playing from behind, you don't really get to do that much with his ult. Because, for instance, an ult like Kelvin will always be super impactful even if you're behind, and it can help you turn around a fight. But Mirage's ult cannot really help you turn around fights in any case. It's mostly just an ult designed for map control and ganking. So where does that put him? I think it puts him right here. I think that his ult can be a little bit conditional as well, because it requires you to communicate with your team when you use it. If the enemy is like hyper aware of hearing the audio, it becomes similar to Warden, where you just hear that audio and you just get the hell out of there. And that is the downside. It's fairly easy. I've been ganked by Mirages several times where like it has no impact. And that is where it's like a lot easier if it's set up by someone. So for instance, if a Mo and Krill ults, you can just teleport on him and actually you will be in the fight before the Mo and Krill ult is over. That's like an extremely strong combo. So yeah, that was my ultimate ability tier list. As I mentioned earlier, we're almost at 700k subscribers. So if you would press the subscribe button, that means a lot to me. There's not that many people that watch my videos that are currently subscribed, as we're currently rebranding from Valorant to Deadlock, so I do appreciate it a lot. And also don't forget to leave a comment down below on what you think about this tier list and what you think is the strongest and weakest ultimate in the game, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.